We're talking about common signs of codependency within a family system. I've got recovered life contributor Holly Maddox on the line to discuss. How you doing today, Holly?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing great. Talking about codependency and family. Wow, what a loaded topic, right? Because codependency in a family system, a lot of people suffer from that. I know a lot of people, Holly, are going to ask right off the bat, what are some of the common signs that you might see if you've got codependency in the family system?
That's a really great question. So many people live with, in family units with codependency. And I think sometimes they don't see it. And many people, I think a sign of codependency would be, thinking and feeling that they're responsible for somebody else's actions, choices, wants, needs, etc.
Yeah, I think so many people are confused about that in the family system. Holly, they might see this in a romantic relationship, like, hey, I'm not responsible for that, or why am I always stepping in, right? But when it comes to their children or siblings or another family member, it's a little bit more blurry.
Yes, very. Yeah. And you lose yourself when you're always putting the other person's needs and wants first. You lose who you are. And, sometimes people tend to shy away from what their passions were before they maybe got into this romantic relationship or had a child who is suffering from a drug addiction. And their sole focus is their child and saving their child, quote unquote. And all of their focus goes to them. And then they forget, hey, I used to be able to do these things, or I used to love doing this, but all my focus is on my child.
You know what? This all has to do with boundaries, obviously, right?
Yeah.
Like setting clear boundaries. This feeling of being responsible and having some sort of control over
Yeah.
what somebody else does in your family. We know, obviously, in recovery that this is an illusion, right? Holly,
Yes.
like you don't really have control over other people. And especially if a loved one is suffering from an active addiction, you know, let's talk about boundaries a little bit, these blurred lines. How do you start to reel back and come back from this if you've recognized that, hey, man, you know what? My boundaries aren't the best. All the lines are blurred. How do you start that process to start setting healthier boundaries?
Well, first, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a lot of practice. And sometimes you have to set that boundary and you have to remind yourself and your loved one that the boundary has been set over and over again because everyone tests limits. But if a parent wants to set those healthy boundaries, let's say, for example, their child has chosen to go to rehab and maybe meeting with them in rehab. When you return home, this is what's going to happen, or this is I'm not going to tolerate anymore. Versus, for example, allowing any alcohol to be in the home, or, whatever it may be and then not allowing that boundary to be crossed. But sometimes it does. And then you have to go and revisit it. I think open communication, having those boundaries communicated, not assumed. I think a lot of people were like, well, then they should know they shouldn't bring alcohol into the house, but they're going to test those limits. And it needs to be, said, I love you. I want you to live here, but I don't want, or will allow alcohol to be in my house anymore, or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Setting those clear boundaries obviously is the key. It's interesting. Somebody told me the other day, Holly, that what they found odd about recovery is that alcoholics seem to, really seek out codependents, and codependents seem to, magnetically attract people that are in active addiction. And this obviously has to do with the family system that you were raised in, probably as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if your needs weren't being met, or you saw that a family member was sick, whether it would be from an illness or a drug and alcohol addiction or an absent mother or father, everyone has those roles that we fall into. And sometimes, having to pick up the slack, or making sure you didn't want to upset that, say for example, your father was an alcoholic and everyone walked on eggshells every time he walked in the door because we didn't want to upset him. And we didn't want to create, chaos, because then the mother would say, well, then he would drink. And that's the reason why he's going to drink, is because we're being loud. And so then they learn to become invisible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. So then that cycle
and
continues.
So breaking this cycle, let's talk about breaking this cycle, Holly, because obviously, I think people underestimate codependency, that it's not a deadly and terrible thing, right? It's just as bad, in my opinion, as somebody who's actively using it. Might not kill you as quick,
correct,
but it will degrade your life in a way in which you really have no value left in your life, right? It will really zap you into nothingness. How do you start to take this back? How do you start to take care of yourself and start doing the things that you need if you've identified that you're in a codependent relationship?
I think support groups and talking to other people, even finding a therapist. That's Al-Anon is fantastic for a lot of codependents. Al-Anon breaks down the 12 steps for the codependent, because their lives also have become unmanageable because they have allowed this behavior to continue. And everyone has, we know that it's true that an addiction or an alcoholism, that disease runs rampant in the family. It's a family disease. It affects everybody. So finding groups such as Al-Anon, being educated, finding a therapist who, making sure that what kind of boundaries and healthy boundaries you need to set, and having that support to be able to set and keep those boundaries.
So Holly, after some people might be listening to this and saying, you know what, yeah, this all sounds great, but I have multi-generations, 3-4 generations, right, of this codependent family system. Is this possible? Can I really break this? Can I really do this and become, and turn my family unit and family system into something that's not codependent? What's your thoughts on that?
I don't think you can solely change the family system. I think you can only work on yourself and what is in front of you personally. If you have the will and the desire to work on you and not continuing to go down that path and to be sucked into the generational trauma and the generational patterns, it's going to take work. But yes, absolutely, it's possible. But you're going to have to put yourself first. I don't think you're going to be able to swoop. That right there is a codependent behavior. I'm going to change my family and I'm going to heal us all. You have to heal yourself first and put yourself first.
Holly, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Sure. Thanks for having me.